4 months ago, we went public, and through the paper, we learned that the Lehigh City Police were doing an investigation on our family.
Well, then recently we just found out that the investigation's over, but they've turned it over to the county.
Basically making us nervous.
There's been some discussion about what's the next step for our family. And we have seriously considered, after a lot of talk, of moving out of state.
Hey everyone, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day. It is Wednesday, September 28th. I am ready to go. We have something to talk about. Actually, a neighbor of the Browns showed up in my comments yesterday, and literally what they told me matched comments that were made to me by an aunt of Kristyn Decker. And I wanted to share this with you because I was like, this is wild. I can't believe we're coming to this point where it's 2022 and the truth is finally coming out. And I know for a lot of people that lived around the Browns or were advocates against polygamy, they're finally feeling like seen and validated. And for that, I want to say I'm glad. I'm glad that they're starting to get validated, that this whole 12 years or whatever it's been is finally coming to an end, and we can't lie anymore about who they are, okay? About who the Browns are and the lie of what the Browns were doing on TV.
Makes me want to yell at them and tell them it's not as happy or great as you're making it seem to be.
So a lot like the Duggars and the IBLP, the Browns were on TV to try to push an agenda that polygamy was consensual and that women had a voice and a choice, and it was in response to the stuff that happened with Warren Jeffs. There was a high peaked interest in polygamy as a result of that case.
It seems like we are meeting the needs of our children in many cases better than we would have as just monogamous.
Well, I think it's definitely tops for our kids.
So here we are, it's 2022, and we found out that parts of the first season and the very end of the first season into the second season were not actually true. And a part of their storyline involving a lawsuit and their prosecution was also not true. So, I mean, the documents were filed, but a lot of this was either overly dramatized or simply fabricated what they felt was going to happen to them, or it could have been real in their minds, but there was nothing proving that it actually was going to happen.
4 months ago, we went public, and through the paper, we learned that the Lehigh City Police were doing an investigation on our family.
Well, then recently we just found out that the investigation's over, but they've turned it over to the county.
So it all revolves around why the Browns moved from Utah to Nevada and how the Browns always end up moving around so much. And the neighbor said it was all fake. And so we want to talk to you guys today. I want to talk to you a little bit about what happened in the Utah situation, but I also wanted to just sort of help you understand how reality television works and why it's not always real. So on TV, we meet the Browns, and they are a family. They're a group of polygamists. It's a family that's in the Apostolic United Brethren. Kody Brown has 4 wives, and that's what we're introduced to by TLC.
I like marriage, and I'm a repeat offender, so I have adopted a faith that embraces that lifestyle. I like to reward good behavior, so if you're good with one marriage, they figure you'll be good with 2. I hope they think I'll be good with 4.
When a network is getting pitched a show by a production company like Figure 8, Figure 8 has to put together a deck, which is a sort of a PDF that tells them what their series is all about. And then they also give them rundowns of what they'll be able to see in every single episode. So episodes are built one by one by one. So when an episode happens, it's planned ahead of time and they know what they're doing. Now, a lot of people assume that content is just filmed, and then they go with it. And then they figure out what the story that they're going to tell once the filming is over. But reality television isn't that, I mean, if it was a show like The Bachelor, Bachelorette, or even a show that's filming in real time and they're literally doing a show where people aren't leaving, it might be that way. But in this specific way, where they go to film for a certain amount of days and then they come back and they go back and they come back and they go back with the production, because they're not following them every single day, you guys. That's not how it works. There's a good chance that everything that you're seeing, even though the reactions are very much real, the truth is that the storyline is built by producers, edited by producers. And so what you're seeing is a for reality television dramatized version of a family. And that means that after 12 years, a family is going to know what sells. And Kody's going to know what drama is going to be good and what drama is not going to be good. What are things that make people tune in? Moving. What are things that make people tune in? Babies. What are things that make people tune in? Weddings. Big events in life are the kinds of things that fans want to see. And it's the interesting component of polygamy. We also want to find out the dynamics of relationships. Fighting is also something that will drive views and ratings. Divorces. Now, I'm not saying the divorce is fake. It's absolutely for real, but there's a lot of factors that come into play when you think about reality television, why decisions are made by family members. Now, in the very beginning of the series, there was this idea that all polygamists were being persecuted, and the Browns were acting like because they were going to go public, suddenly they were going to be under investigation. The truth is that Utah has had a long-standing rule about prosecuting polygamy, and they just don't. In fact, they don't prosecute polygamy unless crimes have been committed. So they don't, it's very rare in the state of Utah that they actually prosecute someone for polygamy, meaning they have more than one wife or purporting to cohabitate with more than one woman, purporting, as they say on the show, to be a wife. What they do prosecute for are the crimes that encompass polygamy, like things that happen to children, forced marriages, DV, food stamps fraud, welfare fraud, bankruptcy fraud, tax fraud, all of that. Polygamy itself is not very well prosecuted. So in the beginning of the season one, or the end of season one, we find out the Browns are under investigation and they need to abruptly move. So a neighbor of theirs left a comment on my YouTube, and here's the thing is I've already gotten the same story from Kristyn Decker, who happens to be an aunt of Kristyn. So the fact that it's being told to me twice by two different people that don't know each other, I'm just going to say that I know that this is likely the truth. And it's backed up by court records because in court, they said there was never a threat of prosecution. So this is what Charbear said, and I'm sure this is just their username. It says, "The Browns were my neighbors in Lehi, Utah. The fleeing in the night scene with sirens in the background was pure fiction. I knew then calling it reality would be a stretch. My uncle also happened to be the chief of police in Lehi at the time. They weren't under any threat of prosecution whatsoever from the city or the state. Total BS. The Browns decided that they needed to flee Lehi, Utah under the cover of night and get out because the cops were coming. They were going to arrest them." This is like folklore, and it's not really folklore. It's actually fear-based because in polygamy, there has been years and years and years of fears of raids. Now, a raid is what they would call, like, they always want to position it as though they're the victims of the government because they are coming in to destroy their families. But that's not the intention of a search warrant. So let's call it what it is. A search warrant, executing a lawful search warrant, is what some would call a raid, but it's a lawful execution of a search warrant. And a lot of times that means people get arrested, especially in polygamy. And this has happened multiple times with different search warrants on different compounds of different groups. With the Browns, there was never any indication that they had committed any crimes, and so there was nothing to arrest them from. The Attorney General in the state of Utah flat out said they would never prosecute or sign off on. The prosecutor in the county, in Utah County, said they would not prosecute the Browns. The Browns were never going to be prosecuted, but it made good TV and it made you guys think that they were going to be prosecuted, and so they had to flee the state. So in an effort to ramp things up even more, they then filed a lawsuit in federal court alleging that they were emotionally damaged, and they were trying to get laws overturned in the state of Utah to make it so that polygamy could be legal. And they were trying to get awarded damages for the pain and suffering that they felt by being threatened with prosecution. During the court hearing and during the court case, the prosecutors and the county that was involved in all of this presented evidence to the court that said we never had an intention to ever prosecute them. They listed out all the different cases that had been prosecuted in the last several years, and most of them had involved other crimes. They specifically said the Browns were not committing any other crimes, and they said they were never going to prosecute them. They might have felt like they were going to, but it was never a reasonable threat. That's what the state said, and that's what the county argued. They even changed and wrote into law. The prosecutor in that county then even wrote a rule that said that they were not going to prosecute people for polygamy alone. They appealed it. They file all of this, and then they moved out of the state of Utah. So what happens is the court figures out, well, they can't actually be tried for this. Even if there was a threat, they can't even be tried because they left. And under the current law, we can't prosecute someone for polygamy for doing something in a state that we have no jurisdiction over. So ultimately, it was a moot point because they had moved. Not only a moot point because of that, but it was also a moot point because they weren't going to prosecute them anyway. So the case was done. They lost. So the initial judgment went towards the Browns. The county and the people that they were suing appealed it. The appeals court kicked it back to and said, overruled. Like, your case is moot. You were never going to be prosecuted. It's done. And they acted like it was like the state of Utah is coming after us. And that was never the case. The state of Utah does not care about the Browns and is not going to prosecute the Browns unless they commit crimes. But this is not one crime they're going to be charged for. So that neighbor has the exact same story as Kristyn Decker, who also told me that, you know, it was really funny for her to watch that whole thing play out because she knew flat out they were never going to be prosecuted, and it was totally played up for ratings and as a way to make them look at like the victims. And then Kody filing the lawsuit against Utah and trying to get, you know, polygamy overturned was again drama for the show to create a storyline, which ultimately resulted in them losing their lawsuit, nothing changing. So they took a lot of steps to make it seem like they were being persecuted when they weren't, okay? So then you add to that this is sort of a fake storyline that was built for the show, but at the end of the day, he's thinking that this is what's gonna get polygamy overturned, and it doesn't work. And then you add into the layer that Browns, throughout the very beginning of the seasons, they were doing a lot of, like, they would go to rallies and they would try to get laws passed, and they were doing a lot of things in the world of advocacy. I told you yesterday about the principal voices and how Kristyn was used by principal voices to speak out. Well, today I actually spoke to Kristyn Decker, and the reason why the AUB needed Kristyn to speak out was because Kristyn Decker, her aunt, because Kristyn Decker started, the daughter of the prophet, a coalition to help victims leave polygamy. Sound Choices Coalition and other organizations that were started in the late 1990s and early 2000s was advocacy groups to help educate women and children and any adults that wanted to leave polygamy, helping them understand sort of the doctrine, the false doctrine of it, what it means to go, what the abuse cycle of it means, and help them flee. They don't do like safe houses, but they help with education. They help with legal expenses. So one thing they would do is it's very hard if a woman leaves to get her kids. And so they frequently have to sue their husbands for custody. And the cult will spend a lot of money trying to keep those kids. Why do you think Kody and Robin fought so hard for Robin's 3 children? Because David Jessup left the group. He had no plans to be a polygamist, and they needed to keep those 3 kids in the cult. That's the only reason that kind of stuff happens. They will spend all kinds of money to fight people, intimidate them, to get them to give up their kids so the kids can stay in the group. And Kristyn's group was helping with legal expenses, helping with advocacy, and also with working with lawmakers to help pass laws to make polygamy a crime, to get more focus on the crimes that happen within polygamy. And Kristyn became a very large voice with others within the anti-polygamy world, and they were working hard. And so Kristyn was the response. So if the daughter of the prophet is going to create the coalition to help people get out, the granddaughter of the prophet and the granddaughter of both prophets is going to be the answer of counteracting what her aunt is saying. So it's kind of convoluted if you think about it, but they were trying to fight against Kristyn. So Kristyn even came on to Sister Wives. And if you can imagine how hard that must have been for Kristyn to be on the show where she had to sit on a panel with the Browns, who she knows hates her, thinks she's an apostate, and think that she's the enemy, and they are using the TLC network to basically abuse Kristyn. Think about that. And Kristyn's experience on the show, she has told me, was horrible. She has a lot of trauma from it. She felt like it was all directed around making the Browns look a certain way and completely negating the realities of what polygamy was. Her experience of being in polygamy for over 50 years, mind you, in the group that they were in, all of them were in the same group, and the Browns acted like they were crazy.
It makes me want to yell at them and tell them it's not as happy or great as you're making it seem to be. I really just don't like that anybody's in a group or is involved in trying to still live polygamy. I don't like that.
This is all coming full circle, and I know this is like so convoluted in what I'm explaining to you, but Kristyn and Kody's start on the show was a response. They went public in response to combat what Kristyn and her friends were doing to try to help people flee polygamy.
I think that it's patently unfair and unjust, in fact, to say that polygamy is evil because evils happen to you in polygamy. Monogamists have abuse. Other societies have abuse.
It is huge within polygamous societies and cultures and families, and it's not just in America, I think that I have the right to say my feelings about polygamy as much as you get to say them.
Kristyn has been fighting against the narrative that's been put out by the Browns for 13 years, trying to wake people up to realize what you're seeing on TV is false. Kristyn told me 2 years ago that they were never a threat for prosecution. She told me the whole thing was fake. She told me that everything that you see on TV is dramatized. And she said that the reality is that you're seeing real emotions. And the sadness and the frustration, that's totally real. But it's over dramatized. And honestly, when I asked Kristyn, like, what would her advice be to people? And she said, the sooner people stop giving Kody Brown attention, the sooner they stop going and serving his, like, and these aren't her verbatim words, but the general sense of it was like, the more you feed his delusional need for attention and this idea that he's doing God's work and doing good things, the more you're empowering him. So the sooner people forget and start seeing him for who he is and stop giving him the positive attention, the better. And people start seeing that the veil that they've put over polygamy is false. And the reality is that what she and her friends were doing to try to help people was never a bad thing. But the response was, well, we're going to get you a show on TV. Now, there's also been a lot of rumors that the Browns were kicked out of their church, and that's also false. I spoke to Kristyn about this in length, and there's a lot of reasons why we know this is false. It was only a few years ago that Kyle Henderson appeared on Sister Wives. Kyle is a bishop in the AUB. No bishop in the AUB would associate with the Browns if they were kicked out, point blank. They're not kicked out. They have to say they're kicked out, or they have to say that there's tension, or that they're not part of the church, because the church doesn't want to be associated with the show, but the show is actually helping the church. It's convoluted. The AUB will never admit any involvement in the show. The AUB will never admit any desire to be a part of the show, but point blank, they're still associating with people in the show. The lawsuit that they filed in court proved that they were still involved with the people, going back and forth. They were like living in Vegas, but going back to Utah all the time to go to church and go to church functions. So that's the truth. They're not kicked out of the church. They are still members of the church. Whether they go or not and go all the time, I don't know. But I asked Kristyn the other day if they're still members, and she said they've never been excommunicated. They might get some pushback if they went to church, and they might get some eyeballs and eye rolls, but they're not kicked out. So all of this is fake. Stop feeding his delusions, and we're all just watching a fictitious version of who they are, a scripted version that they wanted us to see of what polygamy is. And the truth is polygamy is more like what Kristyn Decker talks about in her book, 50 Years of Polygamy, than what the Browns wrote about in their book, Becoming Sister Wives. Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Bye, guys.